Welcome back, everyone. And in my adventures, or I should say in my side projects working on various IT things, I have another Mikrotik box on the bench. And this is actually, once again, this is going to be going and replacing another Mikrotik product, one I hope that I'll get a chance to open up, but potentially not, because it doesn't belong to the company I work for. It belongs to a separate client, so I might not get that one back. But we're still going to look in this one before I deploy it. This is a step down from the CCR1016s we looked at a while ago. This is a CCR1016 12S plus, or sorry, 12C plus 1S, which means this is, unfortunately, actually not quite the one I meant to order. Sorry, this is the 1016 12S-1S Plus, which is kind of a weird one in their lineup. But let's go ahead and just get it out of the box. Typical Mikrotik packaging. We've got cardboard. We've got our rack ears included, screws, rubber feet. And something we haven't seen before included in any of these. This is a Mikrotik CCR1016. This is a single 10100 to gigabit Ethernet adapter. And in hindsight, means this is not quite the package I meant to order. Let's get this out. So, if you remember, the 1036s were 8 gigabit ports and 2 10 gig ports. This is a 12S, which means we have 12 gigabit ports and 1 10 gig port, except they're all fiber optic. So in order to help people out, as it were, Mikrotik has seen fit to, in fact, I'm going to put it in SFP1, seen fit to include a single gigabit to, SFP to gigabit adapter. Which in hindsight, I picked this over the other 1016 variant because it had the 10 gig port, and I wasn't really paying attention. I didn't mean to get all those copper ports. So who was this for? Well, it's for a couple of different people. If you are running long-distance gigabit links, this is going to be your favorite router, really. You've got 12 ports. They're all SFP, and, fill it up with 80-kilometer modules. If you're like me, I think I can get away with using a direct attach cable. That'll actually be something we'll test a little bit here with one of the other Mikrotik products I've got on my bench. But if you're like me, you'll be using this to connect it to the internet and then hooking one of these other SFPs up, hopefully via a direct attach copper cable to a switch. Yeah. Let's go ahead and plug it in. The good news is, because this is all fiber, it's actually lower power than it would be if it was all copper. Typically, although that's really up to what transceivers you put in it. Alright, so let's plug in power 1. You know what? I'm doing this the wrong way. I need to open it up first. Let's grab a screwdriver and see what's inside. Alright, so pretty typical construction. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 screws that hold it together. By the way, just quick tour around. We've got 12 SFPs on the front, 1 SFP plus. We have an Ethernet console port, a micro SD card slot, and a USB port, and of course Mikrotik's lovely LCD. after using these for a while, they're not inherently the most useful feature, and I wouldn't necessarily miss them if they went away. And part of that just comes down to they're not very sensitive, the touchscreens. I think they're resistive touchscreens still. So they either need to update these touchscreens or get rid of them and, you know, cut $50 off the cost. But they do look pretty on the rack, and they've got little graphs on it, which makes some of the higher-ups happy. So they've got that. And it shows the IP address once you've set it up, which can be handy. Around back we got a couple of cooling fans, and then we have vents on this side, but not that side. So all the cooling is going to be front to back or in and across. Normally, I would use my Tack Life driver, which that wasn't. That was actually my Klein screwdriver, which doesn't go to quite the right size here. So we're going to break out the whereas, because I don't want to strip any of these out. So I'm expecting fairly similar construction to what I saw on the 1036. Except I shouldn't see any phi chips or anything, since I should see one. So, and I actually already sent Mikrotik a message on their social media asking if we can get a 12 gigabit port version of this, because really, that's what I meant to get. This is kind of a weird one on their lineup. They've got the 1009 below it, which you can get 9 gigabit ports and a 10 gig port. 9 gigabit actual Ethernet ports and a 10 gig. And then there's the 1036 above it, which has an 8 gigabit and dual 10 gig. This is in between. So, well, now that is interesting. So we've got dual power supplies. They're not redundant, but it took me, 2 minutes to get in here once I found the right screwdriver. So these are replaceable, and you can order replacement power supplies from Mikrotik, or, they'll do warranty support. There's our LCD cable, and there's a port on the motherboard that I don't recognize. It looks like, this is J2. It looks like an internal USB, maybe? Maybe in some kind of serial. It's located here if you can see that. Other than that, most of the board over here is fairly bare. We've got our power inputs. I think they may use the same board for something else, or there may have been revisions to it. There's 2 additional fan headers that there's nowhere to even install a fan on this particular system. Once again, we've got a 2019 date printed on the case, although I'm not seeing an actual date code on the circuit board itself. So that's an interesting feature, although I wish they would have printed this on the back. So they printed the MAC addresses for E1 through E13, so that's going to be my interfaces on the front. And they've got a sticker with that on the board, and they have a sticker with that on the bottom, which is fine, but once this is rack mounted, this is what I'm going to be able to see. I'm not going to be able to see this. I'm not going to be able to open the case and see it. So I wish they would have done that. Oh. Well, that's interesting. so far, the Mikrotik gear we've looked at, I think, used steel enclosures. In fact, let me check something. I rescinded that statement. My CRS1016 is aluminum. This just seems a little bit thinner than some of the other ones. Although, that could just be an illusion. Sharp edges on that, by the way. Watch out if you open it. You're not really going to be opening these, I guess, unless you're, well, me looking at what's going on or swapping out a power supply, though. So, anyway, the case is grounded itself, which is good. Yeah, like I said, not a whole ton of board features. We've got this plastic shroud, which is just going to hide the heat sink for the Tile CPU. This is another Tile architecture chip. This is 16 cores and I believe 1.2 gigahertz, which most of Mikrotik's higher end routers really are those Tile CPUs, which has its ups and downs. It's really good at doing lots of things. It's not necessarily great at doing one thing fast. It's just good at doing lots of different things. So this is going to pull air in. We've got this vented pattern on the front. This duct is going to force a lot of the air through this primary heat sink. We don't have as much airflow here on what I assume is related to the 10 gig port. And then we've got one itty bitty PHY chip down here for the console port, which I believe is 10100. So, and this has got memory modules right here. I don't think there's any on the underside of the board, since that is, yeah, 2 gigs of RAM. So I think that's enough chips for 2 gigs of RAM. And then we've got, this is probably 512 megs of NAND flash. I take that back. That's only 128 megs of flash, which should be more than enough for anything I'm going to do with this. So yeah, this is actually, it was picked to replace a router board 3011. And the router board 3011 is a great small business router, but it doesn't do super hot on VPN. It's a dual core ARM, and it's a relatively old ARM at that. And in my experience, you get 50 to 60 megs a second per VPN client, and one VPN client is going to push the CPU to 50%. So you can get maybe 3 or 4 people on that before it just becomes unusable. This, on the other hand, since it shares the architecture with my 1036, and I've been able to punish my 1036 and push 500 megs a second through the VPN and watch it hit a massive 1% CPU load, it just doesn't care. So I expect better VPN performance out of this. This is why this is going in. There's nothing wrong with the 3011 that it's going to be taking out. It's just the application has changed. That 3011 I put in for this client 3 years ago. It hasn't been an issue. So up until now, they want VPN, and when I told them this was, $700, and really, since they have a 500 meg internet connection, going to do just fine, was kind of a no-brain upgrade. They're already, paying for work to be done on other stuff. It's cheap hardware relative to what else is going on. So anyway, that's our quick internal look at the 1016. Once again, I can't pull the board out. I can't risk damaging this for the client. And honestly, there's nothing of any real interest underneath the board on this one. It's not like the 1036 where I couldn't account for some of my memory capacity, or I thought there might be a SODIMM slot hidden under the board. It's not even like the 354 or the 328 where there's PoE boards to pull out. This is really simple. So all the hard stuff is inside the SoC. I would like to see them do a version of this that had 12 copper ports and the 10 gig SFP plus. I don't know if that would be too much to ask. Other things I will say on the CCR line in general, now that I've had lots of time with my 1036 units, I think the 1036 is probably the best balanced out of all of them. And part of that comes from there are like 4 tiers of CCR, we'll say. There is a 1009, 1016, 1032, and 1072. And the 1072 is just way out as a Halo product. They're about $3,000. They're not overpriced. It's all 10 gig. You get 8 10 gig ports. So you've got a relatively low port count for a high-end firewall compared to some of the other ones. And then you've got a massive 72 core tile CPU, and they're just all 10 gig ports. You can push full line rate through all those ports, no problem, and do various routing and other functions to it. But it's only 8 ports, although they are all 10 gig ports, and a lot of the stuff that these get used for as small business devices, you generally want a few more ports than that. And because they're all copper, connecting it to fiber infrastructure, which this is in the same boat, is going to call for various devices like this. The 1016, which we're going to power this one up, and the 1009 do have a better mix of ports. You can get them with, there is a 1016 12C, and that's just all copper, 12 copper ports. The 1009, there's a couple of versions of it. The version of the 1009 that I'm most familiar with is the 7G 1C-1S Plus. There's also an 8G 1S Plus. And those are really for smaller networks. The 1009, the one I'm most familiar with, is the 7G 1C 1S Plus, and there's a PC version of it that's passive cooling. It's really for small networks. It's really focused on that silent operation because it can be passively cooled. That's at the low end, and it's about $500. This is about $700. For $1,000, you end up in the 1036 territory, and we paid about $1,300 for the EM models, and you can pay anywhere from about $1,000 for the regular memory capacity models. The 1036 gets you 8 copper ports, which is not as many as the 12 that you can get on a 1016. It also gets you 2 10 gig ports. And that's where I think things get really interesting, because on a lot of the networks I'm working on right now, I'm starting to see speeds where the idea that I could have multi-gig internet coming in isn't that far-fetched anymore. 3 years ago, 4 years ago, the idea that multi-gig fiber would come into a business location was ridiculous. Now, I've seen some companies offer gigabit fiber for $1,000 a month, which, granted, that's expensive, but it's not unreasonable as a business expense. That used to be several thousand a month. So, if I'm buying a piece of equipment like these and I'm looking just a little bit into the future, 2 years, the idea that 2 gig fiber might come in isn't quite that far-fetched anymore at some of these locations. So the 1036 having two 10 gig ports opens up a lot more options where I have a 10 gig network core and I have a multi-gig incoming internet service. That's not to say that I can't do it with one of these. I could bring multi-gig in on the SFP Plus and do link aggregation out some of the other ports and still leverage that multi-gig internet, just potentially not as well as I could if it was directly attached to the network. So the 1009, the 1016, I think they're on their way out. At least as far as my normal choices are concerned. That's not to say they're bad. I would love to have this 1016 for my home network. I have gigabit Ethernet coming in. I would plug this in and drop that SFP Plus into my CRS328 and be happy. So, talked long enough. Let's grab a laptop and you know what? I'm not gonna do. And actually, one thing that I want to try is this. And I don't know if this will give me information on it with only one end plugged in or not. This is an SFP direct attach cable. And this one is not new. As you can see, it's got a couple of small kinks in it. This cable contains a, what do they call it? Twin axial copper, which I believe is just 2 copper lines. Wish I had an extra one of these. I'd cut it open and see what's in it. But basically, these cables allow you to plug SFP modules in without having to either A, adopt to traditional copper Ethernet, or B, use fiber, which is by and far more traditional for SFPs. But these are typically used for 10 gig links. I use these for 10 gig links all the time because when you're only going 5 feet, although you can go to fiber, I actually did in my rack at home. I went to fiber on both sides of the connection because I got a great deal on transceivers. It's traditionally more expensive to use fiber adapters on both ends. So you get a 10 gig short range, so 10 GSR, and a new 10 GSR is, I don't know, what are they, $50? They've come down. So brand new 10 GSR connections, $60, $70 gets me 2 links. Although I do need to provide, I think I'm dumping heat from my laptop into the switch, a section of fiber optic cable at that point. So 5 meter fiber optic cable, OM3 cable, $14 a piece. So for 2 links, we're talking about $70 in transceivers plus $30 worth of cable. We're talking $100 for 2 cables. Whereas if I grab some twin-ax cables, I can get 4 SFP plus direct attach cables for 90 bucks. So that's not good. It's making a lot of noise with this particular direct attach cable in. Okay, but it did detect it. It does know that it's a Cisco. It's a copper digital cable. So that is interesting. $45.24. Well, I don't think my twin-ax cable had anything to do with the fans. But it looks like they need to do a little bit more with their fan management curve because they just kind of jumped to 8,000 RPM when they came on. Anyway, there's a little bit of information about twin-ax cables. You know, why would I use twin-ax cables? Well, traditionally they save me money. Personally, can you get SFP Plus modules cheaper? Yes. Would I use them in a production environment? Not typically. And what I mean by that is, like, I got some Avago branded SFP Plus modules for my setup here at home. I got them for $5 a piece. That's great. I bought them secondhand on eBay. That is a little bit too far on the low end for me to be comfortable putting that in production. These twin-ax copper cables, if I'm just wiring within the rack, they are a bit bigger and heavier than regular Ethernet. They certainly don't like being bent. But they do work. And when you have a 16-port CRS 317 to wire, you buy a lot of these. So, anyway, that's a quick look at the CCR1016 12S 1S Plus. They really need better names for these. I like that they're descriptive, but they are a mouthful to say. And a little bit of information. So I can use this 10 gig rated twin-ax cable in my gigabit ports, which means I don't have to order more gigabit SFP Plus adapters. Although it might not be a terrible idea to order an extra one just in case. So anyway, if you have any questions or comments, you want to know something more about the 1016 or any of the Mikrotik CCRs we've looked at, let me know in the comments below. I'm not going to have direct access to the 1016 once it's deployed. It's going to be going into a client site, so unfortunately, by the time this video airs, although I'll still be able to answer questions about it, I won't be able to do much to it directly. Finally, I want to thank anyone who helps support Pocketables on Patreon or through our Amazon affiliate links. It is stuff like that that helps make videos like this possible. I also want to thank Alextrix for providing our opening and closing themes. Thank you for watching.